introduce Alex Cazaly, who is a sixth form teacher at Newham College. And Alex has been working with the Civil War Petitions Project using primary sources with sixth form students. So Alex, one thing that lots of teachers at the conference have been saying is how difficult it is to include primary sources within a busy A-level curriculum. How did you get around that in your work?
Well, we very much took advantage of the situation at my college, which is where we have a Wednesday afternoon just dedicated to extracurricular time for the students. And so we wanted to put on a project to actually address this issue surrounding how difficult it is actually to include primary sources within the A-level curriculum. So first of all, we wanted to tackle the issue of how sources are approached in the first place in an A-level curriculum. And this tends to be what is often referred to as these decontextualized gobbets, where you just see an extract from a historical document presented to you on a little box in the exam paper, and the students have to apply context to it as fast as they can. And so we really wanted to address that issue, as well as finding the time to spend more time on sources. So we put on a super curricular project looking at the Civil War, and specifically the Civil War petitions and this form of welfare in the 17th century, to actually give the students a chance to not only spend more time on primary sources, but also engage with them in with more methods and with a different methodology than they might necessarily use in an A-level exam.
And did they find that challenging?
Initially, yes, there was definitely a hesitancy to approach these petitions that we use, because the petitions, you can see them on the website, the Civil War Petitions website, scanned in, so you can see them in their written format, and immediately the students see the lovely squiggly handwriting of the 17th century and think, I'm never going to be able to read this. And then you have the transcript next to it, but of course this is in the original 17th century English, and again the students are very hesitant and thinking, this is basically a foreign language to me, I'd have an easier time understanding something like Spanish, and so they sort of have this fear of the new language. And then also you can find them in the sort of modern translation as well on the website, which the students were definitely more confident in approaching, but we did really want to address this issue of language as well.
So how did you support students to feel confident in engaging with these sources?
We really wanted to sort of scaffold it. So we wanted to allow them to just dive in and engage with these sources and create their own meaning for these sources, but also scaffold it to tackle this idea of hesitancy, especially again when it comes to language of 17th century sources. So one of the methods that we used in one of our sessions was to give them a completely blank glossary. And then one of the petitions in the original 17th century English and a modern translation of that. We asked them to identify words they didn't recognize in the original 17th century English, and then see if they could find their own translations for this in the modern translation, and to fill in their own glossaries with these kind of translations that actually they've engaged with and they found for themselves, and that they've applied their own meaning to and found their own meanings behind it. And then with that glossary that they've self-produced, to tackle a whole new petition in the 17th century English.
And so what would you see as the real benefits to students in approaching these sources and in gaining confidence in looking at these primary sources?
I think the major benefit is, first of all, that they are getting to interact with sources in a way that they wouldn't necessarily have been able to achieve before on either a GCSE or an A-level curriculum. And actually in a fashion that most historians are approaching sources with. So we actually had them looking through an archive, selecting their own sources, engaging with it in the original 17th century English, and actually creating their own meaning from that, rather than having a certain meaning dictated to them from someone else's translation. And I think that was really beneficial, this idea of producing their own meaning, because then the sources actually became something meaningful to them, rather than, like I say, these decontextualized gobbets that they need to quickly in an exam context apply context to.
And so what would you say to teachers when they're considering approaching a project of this kind, or perhaps a lesson that engages with this particular archive, with the Civil War Petitions website? What would be your advice?
My advice would be to, again, do something that's not really always allowed within the limits of an A-level curriculum, and use play as a form of pedagogy. And we really wanted to use that in our sessions. So we used role play, and we actually got them to write their own petitions and role play as petitioners, and they had to actually go through the process of a trial to see if their petition was valid or not and be judged by their peers in this context. And they took on the roles of these historical characters. And we found that they really took off with this and they loved just playing around and empathizing, but also having fun while doing so, and going beyond anything a textbook could really achieve in terms of empathy and understanding for historical figures. And so, yeah, my recommendation would be to, you know, do that thing that A-levels find really hard to achieve sometimes and make it fun, play and learning through play and allowing them to create their own meaning through their own actions, I'd say.
And where can teachers find support for that kind of approach? Did you use any particular resources? Where would you advise teachers to look?
Yeah, we definitely found some good resources on the Civil War Petitions website. There's a variety of different kind of resources, and also we used your own resources that you put together for this role play, which we found to be really helpful. And so really, I'd say it's important to sort of engage with these archives and these people who are actually putting together these archives, because there's actually so many resources alongside just the archive itself.
So is there anything you'd like to say about this project before we say goodbye?
I'd say this project, for me as a teacher, has really demonstrated that teaching the 17th century can be quite transformative for students. And it's something that often might be viewed as a bit of a dry bit of history because of the amount of legal change that you have to address and political change. But actually, it's something that you can make really fun by actually empathizing with everyday people in the 17th century, not teaching it as this battle of monarchy versus parliament in the Civil War, but actually engaging just everyday people in their experiences during and after the war, and actually giving the students a chance to employ empathy as a tool for learning rather than doing this sort of A-level method of hurriedly applying context to sources.
That's really inspiring. Alex, thank you very much.